everybody. This is Saline County Hardliners back with you again. And tonight we have a candidate for Saline County Sheriff, Richard Friend. He's running for in the Republican primary for Saline County Sheriff. I actually didn't know him before. We had the cleanup Saline Clean Day, and we happened to be partners in cleaning up Saline County. So we kind of met and got to talking, and then found out that we knew his wife Tammy from my wife and I from a long time ago in church. So it's a small world. But me and Richard got to talking, and I told him he's running, and I said, "Would you like to be on the show?" He said, "Sure. Tell your story and tell what's going on." Richard is a 23-year veteran of the Naval Reserves and Army National Guard. Served in I think he served in the naval intelligence system, and he started out he's been in law enforcement. How many years?
28 years.
28 years law enforcement, and started out with Saline County Sheriff's Department at that time, and then has gone off and done some federal, state level, local level, and right now he can tell you some more detail if he wants on that. But right now he's a police chief of England, Arkansas, but he lives not far from me, really. And he's decided to put his hat in the ring for Saline County Sheriff, which Rodney Wright, we know, is running for state senate. He is no longer going to be sheriff after this next election. So, Richard, how you doing?
Man, I'm good. Thanks for having me today. I'm looking
Glad you're here. Glad you're here. Tell us a little about, if something I missed, you want to talk about yourself, or kind of how you decided to kind of get into this race, because I know I've ran races. It's a big nut to fight off in a county race, and especially when you got to work. I didn't have to work. I was retired. So you still got to be a police chief and run for county sheriff. So it's not an easy thing.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I've lived here my whole life. My wife and I lived here our whole life. We both graduated from Bryant High School. She taught in the Bryant and Bauxite school systems and has, been embedded in the community for years. I started my law enforcement career in 1996 in the jail at Saline County. Worked in various positions, worked in narcotics, undercover for about 3 years in a 4-county drug task force that Saline County used to be a part of. Got hired with Arkansas Highway Police, and then was picked up with NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, as a investigator for them. And at the end of that, I had an opportunity to go back on active duty in the Arkansas Army National Guard as a recruiter. And, that whole time I'd been in the military, in the reserves, first the Army, then the Navy, then back in the Army, because I'm kind of a slow learner. And then I went back to the Guard and did the last 7 years of active duty, retiring at 23 as an E7 after 23 years of service. I was enjoying being retired. I was at home building hot rods and chicken coops. I was driving my wife crazy. Decided I wanted to go back. The only thing I'd ever done in my life had been in law enforcement this whole time. And so I went back to the academy. And while I was down there, I was contacted by the mayor in England, who said that he needed some help and that they needed to turn some things around and address some issues they were having. And I had a connection to England from when I first started in law enforcement. I'd worked there for just a little bit, way back. It's hard to say when you say before the turn of the century, it makes me sound really old, but I worked back there, this century. And he asked me if I'd come back there for a couple of years and help him out and help him straighten some things out. I'm very proud of the people that I work with now and the work that they've done. But as I got closer to kind of ending my time there, I had some people that came forward and said that, Rodney wasn't running again, and that would I be interested in running. And they started bringing some issues to me that I thought were something that should be addressed. And I got more concerned. I went out and visited with some people in the county. I've lived here my whole life. I grew up in Sardis, went to school in Bryant. My wife and I live in Alexander. And more people came to me and said, these are some things that we wish were done better. And so after a lot of thought and prayer and talking to my wife, I decided to announce on July 1st, and I think we're doing very well. We've been to over 2 dozen events since we announced in July.
You froze up.
Me online,
There
you
you go.
see my platform and all of my commercials that we shot on friendforsheriff.com, or you can look up Richard Friend for Sheriff on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram, and send me a message and I'll go out, and I'm glad to talk to anybody because I've lived in this county my whole life. My family's been here for over 100 years. And so I know a lot of people, and I also know a lot of issues. And sometimes the issues are based on things that have happened in the past. And being that I've got that history, I can come in and understand why people look at them a certain way. And so I think there's some issues to be addressed. There's some problems that haven't been resolved that I think I've got an answer for. And so right now, I'm very excited about the positive response we've had from the race, and I'm looking forward to hopefully being successful.
Well, me and Kevin are veterans. I was in the Naval Reserve. I was a 20-year Navy Reserve. Went a lot of different places. Kevin, he was in the Naval Reserve. He didn't stay in, but he spent a little
Eight
time
years
over in
CBs.
Afghanistan over there. And, what, Kandahar over there?
I was in Kandahar, Bagram. I flew all over the place.
But he was a CB.
Yeah,
You know CBs? Yeah.
I do. I do.
I
I
got
know quite a few
yeah, I
CVs.
got a son that's a CB in right now. It's his cousin.
Yeah.
And anyway, his brother's a CB too. We got a bunch of CBs. But anyway, I wasn't a CB. But forgot what I was gonna say now. I got myself off track talking about veterans. Oh, what are some of the things that you are kind of wanting to do differently that's going on now? Like maybe a few of the things that you've thought about that, kind of come in front of your head there about what you want to do different.
Well, I'll tell you the first thing is, and kind of the elevator speech that I give everybody is that we want to put bad guys in jail. We want to put more people on the street, and we want to spend less money doing it. I think that as a Republican and a conservative, a lifelong Republican and conservative, in the last few years, I've been a guest host on 102.9 KRN. And I've heard from a lot of people that their biggest complaint is the government is incredibly inefficient. They spend a lot of money. And then they don't really address the needs of the county. And you know, this is probably one of the biggest issues that I want to address. And we've got to address several issues at once. But we've got an issue with animal control. In fact, I had a message on Facebook today from a person that was following me, and he said, "What's your plan for it?" And, unfortunately, we had Michaela Fortner was killed, and by a pack of vicious animals that the county had to deal with on several
Mm-hmm.
occasions.
Yep.
And no one's been arrested, no one's been charged. And I know there are a lot of hoops to jump through. You can't just go out and start picking up the dogs and things like that. But I'd like to sit down with all the stakeholders, which would be the JPs, the quorum court members, the county judge, and say, hey, let's modify our vicious animal ordinance. I've looked into where the money is being spent at the sheriff's office, and I think I reallocate some money to dedicate to a code enforcement person and for the county. And so they're not only dealing with animal issues, but other issues. Like I've had people talk out and say that, hey, there's people dumping tires on my land out here that I've got, down towards Tull or whatever, or, in East
I
End.
believe they got one, but
Yeah,
this
yeah.
one, this one.
Yeah, they do. They've got one, and he's getting ready to retire. I think that we can allocate enough to have two. I've looked on federal law enforcement surplus, and there are some vehicles that are already outfitted that you can get pretty cheaply. And I think that we can address that. And I've even talked to some business owners, and the first thing they said was, no one's ever asked us to participate in this. We'd love to help solve the problem. I talked to some rescue groups. They're like, hey, we'd love to help you get it. Now, let's be realistic. We don't want to start a dog pound. We don't want to be housing because the next thing you know, it's going to be overwhelmed. But in Lonoke County, John Staley, he got people to donate, just like I've gone out and talked to people. Business members say that if you get elected and you get in there, we'll help you pour the concrete, we'll help you put up the kennels. John Staley, who's the sheriff of Lonoke County, uses state inmates, 309s, to feed and water and care for the animals. And then he works with rescue groups to either get them placed and adopted out or get them moved where he only has them for 10 days. Unfortunately, after that, a lot of times they have to be put down. That's where the quorum court and the judges and others come in, and they have to go, okay, we're going to hold them for this amount of time. And then after that, this is going to happen. But when you've got a girl that's killed and the answer is there's nothing we can do about it, and then, 10 or 12 days later, there's a girl in Benton that's severely mauled, and they were able to do something about it immediately. We've got to do something. Not doing anything is not the right answer. That's one of the things I want to address. The other thing is the growing budget that we've got at the sheriff's office. They go about $500,000 a year, and it's very difficult to point to individual items and go, well, this is why we're paying $500,000 more this year than we were paying last year. And I know things are getting expensive, but the government is not entitled to our money. The working person makes those tax dollars. And as Saline County is growing, I think that we've allocated some tax dollars to certain things that we haven't looked at with a critical eye each year. It's just kind of assumed that, oh, I've got to spend all the money that I was given, and each year I need to increase the budget. I would like to work within the budget constraints that we have and not grow any for a while, because what I'm afraid of is when in the last 5 years, when you're going up $500,000 or more a year, just on the low end average of $500,000, you're one COVID-19 or you're one September 11th away from. You remember when September 11th happened and everybody quit spending money because they were panicked, and COVID-19 happened and the government locked everybody down, and all of a sudden tax dollars weren't being spent. In fact, there were some sheriff's offices that had to lay people off because they didn't have the money. And so I think that we need to be fiscally conservative on the front end and prepare for the worst, because when the worst happens, if you're not prepared for it, then it truly affects the public safety of people. And as the sheriff, you can do more to affect the safety and security of people than the president of the United States can. Because when you call 911, I'm going to make sure a county sheriff's deputy comes up and comes to your house and helps you in whatever you need.
Mhm. Now, of course, the budget time's fixing to come up. I'd be my first budget I've been involved in, because
Mhm.
it's the first one since I went into office in January.
Mhm.
But that's fixing to hit hard here in probably November.
Yeah.
October, November will start really hitting that. And of course, I've always supported what law enforcement needs,
Mhm.
because and emergency services, fire departments.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, I'm not going to go into it right now, but we have a place in our county that I'm kind of working on to try to get lower the money on. I would like to see that lowered. Like
Mhm.
our library has too much. So, and that's not, I'm not against libraries. I'm not going to get into library. I'm just going to say I'm not against libraries, but it's not your first tier. Your law enforcement, things like that, are your first tier. Protecting the citizens is the first tier over that, is my opinion. It really didn't have anything to do with it.
Agreed.
But uh and I brought up the situation with quorum court that, a lot of people want to spend a lot of money on a shelter or something. Well, but it's naive to think that the people that dump these dogs, and that's the problem, people dumping dogs is really
Mhm.
a big issue.
And they
That's a
should be
problem out here in
charged when they
Sardis.
do
That's
that.
a real problem out here.
And they dump them. They're still going to dump them. Those kind of people. This is my opinion, really, but those kind of people are not going to dump them. They're not going to take them to this. Oh, we got a shelter now. We're just taking them to the shelter. No, they're still going to dump them over here in the woods somewhere.
Mhm.
So you got to have enforcement operation, which costs money too. Which a lot of people want it done. They don't want to pay for it, but they want it done, and it costs a lot of money. But you got some good ideas there on using it from within.
I want to reallocate. I don't want to increase the budget that they're operating on right now. I want to reallocate the money that they've got. We need to have more people on the street. The other night, I talked to an individual that works at the sheriff's office, and
Yeah,
that
we're hurting
yeah,
people on the street. Yeah.
and when they got 10/8 at the evening at 6 o'clock at 6 p.m. when they first come on shift, by 9 o'clock that night they'd taken 23 calls, and that's you know, when you've got people, or 750 square miles, even though Benton and Bryant take up you know, a large part of that, there's so many parts of the unincorporated areas of the county that rely on the sheriff's office as their sole form of law enforcement. You know,
But they have to use reserves a lot, you know.
exactly. And the reserves do a great job. I spent a week at the fair. I was the only candidate that had a booth at the fair. I was there every night for the whole week. And I talked to a lot of the reserves that were working. They're doing a great job. And they were talking about the places that are just, the relationship could be better. I'll say that. East End, Sardis, Perrin, a lot of those places, when I go and talk to their fire departments or go and talk to the people that live there, they say, well, you know, I don't see a lot of deputies up in there anymore. And to be fair, um, you don't always see them. And I get the same thing with my police department. They say, I never see an officer in your area. Well, I can go and look on their Axon cameras that track wherever they're going. And I can go, ma'am, he came by your house 3 times last night. And they just, you know, for whatever reason, didn't see him. But what I'm seeing is that when you've got 5, sometimes 6 people on a shift, and you've got all of these people working in the office, you've got all these people that are on special assignments, but nothing is addressed until the patrol division gets it. You know, drug arrests usually start with patrol.
They're
Uh,
the front line, yeah.
yeah, they're the front line. And if you don't support, it's just like in the military, when I don't support my 11 Bravos, my infantry guys on the front line, then it doesn't matter, you know, if you've got, you know, 5 of the best, if you needed 20. And I think that we've got to support them and do a better job and reallocate the resources that we've got to put more people on the streets. The number one complaint that I consistently get, and it's very surprising to me, is that several people have said that their homes were broken into and deputies didn't respond. They took the call by phone. Well, I have 2 issues with that. One is that you're not going to catch the bad guy if you don't go out there in the first place. And I realize residential burglaries are incredibly difficult to solve. You know, the bad guys watch CSI now. They wear gloves. They cover their face for the ring cameras. You know, they're not brilliant, but they're not dumb. And the second thing is, when I talked to some of the deputies, they said, well, we're overwhelmed. Well, if you're overwhelmed and you can't respond to calls of crime in the county, then on, you need to put more people on the streets. So that's the biggest issue right now that I think that needs to be addressed. You know, the animal control, more officers on the street, and then being more fiscally responsible.
And I just myself, I want to make sure that we have a sheriff that, like for instance, we have this hadn't really happened in Saline County, but it could. We had a guy on that's a journalist, independent journalist, and he was covering the governor's mansion, Little Rock, and he was attacked by Antifa, and police came
He was
and they called
attacked
it a
twice.
fight. You know, he was by himself against a bunch of people. You know, and it's kind of like they've been ordered to blow it off. You know, don't bother Antifa. You know, I want to make sure we got somebody. If we have situations like that at the courthouse in Benton, that you know, Antifa is going to be sucking the ground.
Well, the Constitution dictates that, you know, people have the right to protest, they have the right to free speech and things like that,
Right.
but it doesn't give you the right, like we had the other day where in Chicago you had ICE agents that were, their vehicles were rammed. There were protesters out there that were actively ramming their vehicles with cars. You're going to get somebody hurt. You don't use a 3 or 4 thousand pound vehicle as a form of protest. You know, people have the right to protest, and it puts law enforcement in a tricky situation to where you have to allow people who feel very emotional and strong about one side, even if you don't agree with it, they have the right to speak. They don't have the right to, you know, handcuff themselves to the middle of the street. I don't believe that they should block traffic. I think it's a safety issue because then what happens is the county gets sued when one of them gets run over. You know, they don't have the right to threaten or injure law enforcement officers or any other person. And unfortunately, law enforcement's had to walk that tightrope. And so I've seen some places that their default answer is, well, we're just not going to get involved. Well, you're law enforcement. You are involved the day you took the
But
oath.
it's normally a leadership problem.
That's exactly right. It's a
So
leadership.
it's a mayor or it's a police chief or both or a commissioner or whatever it is in whatever city it is, which I don't haven't seen the problem in Benton or Saline County, but it's in Little Rock. I'll guarantee you it's in Little Rock, and I'll say it right now, and you don't have to say anything about it. But the mayor and the police chief in Little Rock are horrible. They're horrible. They are left leaning. They don't want you to. I mean, because we have a lot of that I considered assassination of the airport manager, pretty much. Things like that. It's just we need to get away from that. We need to get away from these, guys just trying to be politically correct that are stuff. And I know that's not you. I'm just wanting to bring that out because I know people in Saline County don't want domestic terrorists running wild.
Well, when I'm sheriff, I'm not going to
I
allow
know.
that.
Oh, I know.
The thing is that the Constitution is the rule of law. I took 6 different oaths of office. When you finish your one oath of it, when you finish your one term of service and then
Mm-hmm.
you extend or re-enlist or you transfer from one service to another. And I've served under several different presidents. And so I've seen the difference in the way that that trickles down, enforcement and the priorities and different things like that. But the Constitution doesn't change. It's not open for interpretation. And the Constitution says you can do these things, but you can't firebomb these people. You can do these things, but you can't threaten them and you can't harass them or beat them because you may feel very strongly against what they're protesting for, and you both have a right to speak. And we're there to make sure that your civil rights and your constitutional right isn't infringed upon just because these folks are popular with whoever is in charge at wherever you're at. And that's where you walk the line. I've always got what I call the grandma rule. If I can't do what I'm doing in front of my grandma, then I probably shouldn't do it in the first place. And if you're standing up for the right thing, I tell my police officers that work for me, even if something bad happens, if you were trying to do the right thing and you were truly trying to help someone, then we'll work it out. It'll be okay. But if, don't stand there and watch something happen. And I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's kind of a viral video now that one of my police officers stopped Arkansas constable from Jefferson County who was he was in an unmarked 25-year-old, 22-year-old pickup truck. He was wearing a filthy shirt. He had a small badge around his neck. And the law says that if you're out working as a constable, there's specific uniform you have to wear. Vehicle has to be marked in a certain way. You have to present yourself in a certain way, and there's certain trainings that you have to have. Well, he didn't have any of that. And of course, this 25-year-old girl who's traveling in Sherrill, Arkansas, in the middle of a 1,000-acre cornfield, she has no idea that this guy is technically
Right.
a law enforcement officer. And so he never called it in. She called 911, notified my officer. He's a very young officer, only has a couple of years of law enforcement experience. He sees them coming in as she's still on the phone with 911. He makes the traffic stop and he sees this guy get out. He doesn't identify himself as a police officer. He doesn't act like a police officer. And so my officer used good judgment and intervened on this young woman's behalf because he started screaming at her and he didn't think at any point he was a law enforcement officer. And you can go to the video and you can look up Arkansas Constable traffic stop, and I think it's got 2 or 3 million views on TikTok. It's got a couple of million views on YouTube. And I'm so proud of my officer because what he did was he stood up and he put his hand against that guy and he said, "You need to back up. You need
Mm-hmm.
to chill out. You need to calm down." And he was trying to de-escalate. And this guy basically was so irate and upset that he thought he was going to jerk this girl out of the car, throw her in his pickup truck, and drive back to Jefferson County. My second officer showed up and he's like, "That's not going to happen." And that's what I want. I want officers who make good. Now, they called me later and goes, "Well, so it turns out this guy's a constable, but he wasn't in uniform. He didn't do this. There were a lot of things that he did wrong. In fact, uh, the Jefferson County Sheriff and the Lonoke County Sheriff actually contacted me and we talked about charging him. He ended up resigning over the incident because of the way he acted. And it turned out that he'd done this to several women. And as a dad of sons and daughters, I don't want my daughters scared and treated like that. But I was proud of the fact that my guys stood up in a situation where there's really not a rule book or a policy for it. And they did the right thing because they said, this guy's not acting right. He's escalated the situation. He's not doing what he should be doing. And he's advocating for this young woman who did everything we tell her to do. If you don't think it's a police officer, I remember when the blue light rapist was
Yeah.
still a thing before he died in prison of COVID.
Hmm.
Um, that she wasn't sure he was a police officer. She called 911. She stayed on the phone with 911, pulled into a well-lit area as soon as she saw my officer in his march unit. And so, I commend her for doing that. And I commend my officers for making a good choice when there really wasn't a rule or a guideline for it. And I said, look, just try to do the right thing. Even if there's not a policy for it, just say, look, I was trying to do the right thing. And that's what I'm going to tell my deputies is do the right thing. If there's a protest or if, more common than not, if there's a disturbance or whatever, let's do the right thing and then base our actions off of that. Trying to help people, don't pick sides, don't worry about political parties or who they're related to or where they're from or
Well,
whatever.
you can't do that
Do,
either.
yeah, do the right thing and we'll probably end up in a good place.
It's just the nation's lost its mind right now. I think that's my opinion.
That's the
I
first
mean,
time I've heard that.
I mean, our county. I've seen a surge in crime, and it's not it's not the police fault. It's just people got nuts. I mean, you got the dude that was in a video. He killed his roommate. He's out naked on Long Hills Road, shooting his gun and stuff. I mean, you used to not hear about stuff like that in Saline County.
Well,
Not
Keith,
much.
No.
Keith, here's the thing that, if you look at the homicides and the violent crimes, they're usually rooted in drugs. I don't know anything about that case other than what I saw in the news. But when you've got someone naked in the middle of the street with a gun, I'm going to venture a guess that drugs
Yeah.
might have been involved. And so,
Yeah.
Or
that's where we've
even
got,
drunk or drugs
yeah,
or sick, just
something. He
totally
was
sick in
impaired
the head.
somewhere.
Yeah.
And
And
so I'm
yeah.
going to make sure that we focus on drug crimes because they tend to be the basis for property crimes. People are breaking into your house to steal your stuff to pay for their drugs. People are killing each other because someone used the last of the drugs. People are having accidents and killing people. They're shooting each other. They're doing things to support their drug habit. And so we've got to get back to being proactive in that. I used to do that when I was undercover in the task force, and that's going to be a big emphasis because we've got the resources to do it.
Sure.
We've got to get out there and start working that, aggressively. And that's where, a lot of people say tough on crime, but that's what I inherited in England. And, the first thing I did in the first month that I was there in
England's been
England,
known to be rough
yeah,
sometimes.
England can be
A redneck town.
well, and what's bad is it's halfway between Pine Bluff and North Little Rock, and so a lot of violent crime and a lot of violent criminals. We've caught a couple of Little Rock's most wanted and Pulaski County's most wanted in England hiding out because they would go to grandma's house or whatever.
What's
And
happening here? Yeah.
we have updated the police department with license plate readers and laptops in the cars and everybody including myself, we all have body cameras and things like that, and we share that data and we go over and we use it as a law enforcement tool, not to get a police officer in trouble or to use, we use it as evidence of a
Sure.
crime. And one of the things that I've noticed is, like, I talked to a Little Rock police officer today and he said that some of their homicides they said they know that these kids, they'll get juveniles, a group of juveniles that come into Saline County because we have all these subdivisions because everyone lives in Saline County and they used to work in Little Rock and Pulaski County in general. And so they would come to our subdivisions, and unfortunately, most people leave their cars unlocked. And we've got dozens of ring cameras when I've gone out and talked to people where they show people just going down the street, and a guy will get out and they'll drop off 4 or 5 people, and they're just checking the cars. And we've had several people that have done that in England. And that's, the things that we have to address is get back. That's where he comes. It's so important to get more officers on the street and to get focused on specific things. I've talked to business owners that said, hey, we can put a bait car out. We can turn the dome light on, put and put some kind of valuable in plain sight and then set up on it with a couple of unmarked units. and be proactive on that, because I want the criminals back to the point to where they're looking around their corner and they're looking
Right.
over their shoulder going, are those the
They're
kind?
not comfortable.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's, when you talk to Little Rock and Pulaski County and places like that, they talk about that people are coming to prey on, crimes to people in Saline County, and then they run back into Pulaski County
Exactly.
because they're just overwhelmed there.
Because that's become a problem. It has. And it's a smaller world now. There's not as much distance between Bryant and Bryant and Little Rock anymore.
Mhm.
And there's no distance between Benton and Bryant anymore.
No, not at all.
And there's really no distance between Bryant and Little Rock if you really want to get technical about it.
Mhm.
And another thing we have against us as far as crime, and this is not anything you can do about, but it just makes it a busier situation for the sheriff's department and the Benton and Bryant police departments, is we're on a major interstate. That always, when a major interstate runs through your city, a major interstate, don't you think that always inflates your possibility of any kind of crime happening?
Absolutely. We had a kidnapping. Amber Alert went out about, I think it's been a little over, I guess it's been about a week and a half now, that a child was forcibly kidnapped, a 2.5-year-old child in England. And they actually got on I-30, came right through Saline County, continued south, went through Hope. And we actually, the North Texas Drug Interdiction Unit was able to recover the child on a traffic stop in Rockwall, Texas, in I think it was Dice City, Texas, but it was in Rockwall and just north of Dallas. And that child came right through Saline County and abducted 2.5-year-old that an Amber Alert was issued on. We've got a lot of crime that moves through here, and you've got
out of state. They're
yeah.
just traveling through because you got to go through here to get to a lot of places.
And I worked a situation once with a trooper who's retired now several years ago, where a guy just committed a homicide in Texas and had stolen the victim's car, and he made a traffic stop near JJ's truck stop at around the 106 on I-30. And he's making a traffic stop for a guy for speeding. And the next thing you know, he jumps out of the car, he's got a gun in his hand, he hits the woods. We end up on a manhunt for 2 days using state police, Saline County Sheriff's Office, Benton SWAT team. And the guy holed up in a house, and while the homeowners were, he'd spent a couple of nights in the woods while the homeowners were out at church.
I know the guy. I
know
know
what
the
I'm
man.
talking about.
I know who got shot.
Yeah,
I know him
and the guy came home, and the
I'm not gonna
suspect
say
was
his
in the
name,
house.
but I know him very well.
Yeah, and shot him. And I was a part of that manhunt. And that's how crime that's transitioning through Saline County can actually affect
Well,
Saline
the
County directly.
homeowner shot him too.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you
And
know,
I know the guy, and he did go to the wrong house.
yeah, he certainly did. Again, I say I'm a constitutional sheriff, and I believe in the Constitution, and to include the amendments and the second one. The second one kind of enforces the
I was
first.
going to ask you to get your. I want everybody to hear, because it's important to people that they have a sheriff that is going to promote or
Follow the
promote.
Constitution.
Yeah, Second Amendment and responsible responsible people with responsible with weapons. What I mean by that is, what I mean. It's not careless, but responsible. They have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to carry responsibly.
I believe that the Constitution is written for a purpose, and it's our guidepost. And if you can't find the answer in the Constitution, you can usually find it in a law book. If you can't find it in a law book, then you should definitely be looking in the Bible. It'll tell you the difference between right and wrong.
Yes, sir.
And
absolutely.
So,
that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I'm a firearms owner. I actually own suppressor too. I'm in the process of getting a second one as we speak. I believe that firearm ownership is a constitutional right, and it shouldn't be infringed. The government shouldn't be in your bedroom or your gun safe is kind of my thoughts on that.
Right.
And I believe that I like living out in the county. If I'm elected,
guns don't kill, people do.
Yeah, if I'm elected, I'll be the first sheriff in, I think, 4 administrations who actually lives in the unincorporated parts of the county, and I've got a 25-yard pistol range in my backyard. And
I'm a
so
CHL instructor. I used to.
Yeah, so When I was with Arkansas Highway Police, I was a firearms instructor with them. I was a
Hmm.
firearms instructor now with England Police Department. And so, I think that just civilians, that there's your constitutional right to own a firearm. Now, I think there's some responsibility with that.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
it's very frustrating when someone comes to me and says, someone broke into my vehicle and stole my firearm, and then you go and look, and well, they didn't lock it. And the problem is that now some police officer is going to make a traffic stop with a criminal who got a firearm because of their negligence. Now, but that's where I believe that there is some responsibility, but you have the constitutional right to own and to carry. And I had a lady the other day that I talked to, and she said, "Well, I've got a gun with me, but I don't have it loaded." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And she goes, "Well, I just was afraid something would happen." And I said, "Well, it's not a gun then, it's a club." And I said, "You should train with it. You should be proficient with it. You should know how to
Yes.
load and unload it and how to make
Yes.
it safe." And there are some people that aren't comfortable with carrying a firearm, and they shouldn't have to. But there are some people, like, I'm always going to have one with me, and because I've never been in a firefight where I said, "Man, wish I hadn't brought all these guns and ammo with me." And so, I'm going to, uh, I'm strongly going to support and defend the Constitution to include the Second Amendment.
Well, one thing that I used to, when I did classes and stuff, I would say, it's not so much everybody's into, marksmanship and all that. I said, well, to me, this is my personal opinion, is it's not so much marksmanship, it's familiarity. If you don't, if you're familiar, if you can, it's, if you sit there and look at your gun, what do I do with it? It's all over with. You don't need to have it. I've told people before, you know what? I suggest you don't carry a gun until you get more training. You're just going to get yourself killed with it.
When
Because, and if you, and they say, well, I don't have a range. Well, you can do that in your home with an
Yeah,
unloaded firearm. You can practice, you know, getting it out,
Everything.
getting it ready. I mean, instead of going, well, now where is this? I, there's people like that just
you've
and,
got to
and
build muscle memory. If you don't
yeah,
build the muscle memory, you're not going to be safe. When we were,
because you're gonna be scared crapless anyway.
and
Well, they
Anybody
have
that's
apps
gonna be
nowadays too. They have apps where you actually get a little laser pistol,
yep,
laser bullet. You put it
uh,
in your
sure,
45. That's what I do at
and
my
you
house
shoot your
because
phone with
45
it,
rounds
and
are
yeah,
yeah,
expensive.
yeah. But
yeah,
it's training. It's training, and if anybody, and I hear guys, I've had so many people, and they'll say, they come in my house, I'm gonna blow their ass off, and I said, well, your attitude's gonna change when that happens. You're
yeah,
gonna be scared crapless, is what you're gonna be. You're gonna be scared to death, and if you're not, you're a fool.
yeah.
So, you're if you are a marksman, it may go out the door because all this is gonna happen in like 2 seconds.
Most gunfights are especially with law enforcement, are 15 feet or less, and they're
Yes,
over with in 10 seconds. And
yes.
that's so I graduated from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, when I was an investigator with NCIS. And one of the things we did, we carried a SIG P225, and we had to disassemble the gun and reassemble it in a certain amount of time and do a function check. And we had to do it over and over and over. And so you would disassemble the firearm. And at first it was, I just want to see that you're proficient with it and that you build muscle memory. And then they would put a time standard on it. And then they would knock that. And of course, the first time they do it, it's easy. Oh, yeah, it's no problem. I've been around guns my whole life. My dad taught me about firearms, was the first president of the Benton Gun Club. And so, I've always been around guns and gun safety and been proficient with them. Then the military just built on that. Um, when we're here at FLETC, we're taking this SIG apart and we're putting it back together. They take the time and then they take a little time off and a little time off to where you're flying through there. But what we didn't realize at the time is we're building muscle memory. And then they got to where they would take the parts and dump them out in a plastic bin, and they would blindfold you and go, "This isn't timed, but put the gun together by feel." And the reason that they do that is in a gunfight, when your thumb feels the safety, you don't actually feel, you don't consciously go, "My thumb is on the safety. I can now decock it, or I can take the gun off a safe, or I can do whatever with it because the muscle memory is just automatic. It's right there, and it's one less thing to think about when the bullets are flying in your direction. And so, I think that a lot of people buy their mom a six-shot revolver and they take them outside and they shoot a pie tin, a hubcap or a pie pin with it or something.
Six
And
rounds and
yeah,
you're
six
good to go.
rounds ago, there you go. And then what happens is they get into a critical incident and they're scared, or they doubt their ability, or God forbid, somebody else shows up and their stress level. People don't understand how stress affects your decision making. And that's another thing we did there at FLETC was um, we would use what's called simunitions, where they would fire the paint rounds that actually come out of a firearm in a projectile. And they would add stress, and people would talk about getting tunnel vision, not hearing
Uh-huh.
things that were said to them and things like that. And so it's very important that if someone's going to exercise their Second Amendment right, that they should absolutely be proficient. That's part of their responsibility and their right.
There's a lot to it. There's a lot
Yes,
to it. And
absolutely.
and I read somewhere one time they were talking about in the old West, you had you talk about these Wyatt Earp guys like that, Doc
Hmm.
Holliday, gunfighters, that, you know, it was not so much that they were great marksmen. They had the will.
Hmm.
They didn't flinch. It's who doesn't flinch, who
Yeah.
has the nerve. The other guy, because if you think twice, it's probably too late.
Hmm.
And I know there's a lot to think about. People go through their, well, am I going to go to prison? Am I going to, because I believe we have now the a stand your ground law, which we didn't before. Is that correct, or do you know
So they've,
where you don't
they,
have to retreat?
right. Well, they don't. What happens is they've just kind of defined it was with that group of laws that they passed a few years ago that basically used to be you could carry a firearm if you were on a journey. And then
Right, yeah.
the attorney general came back and said we need to redefine this and clarify it. And then that package of laws that came to pass basically said that you didn't have to have a concealed carry permit to carry a firearm, that you could carry a firearm in your vehicle, and people open carry now in Arkansas. Now, I have my own opinion about open carry, but I also understand that it's the law and it's a constitutional right. And so the only thing I ask is, like, I saw a guy um, at an event this weekend, and he was open carry, and he had a really nice gun, had a $700 pistol with him, and he had about a $7 Uncle Mike's universal holster that it was in. And that's the biggest issue that I have, is that someone who's never had to fight over a gun before, someone who's never had to run, or perhaps you're trying to hurt and get your family to the car or whatever to evade a situation, you get to a point where you have to resolve it. Um, there's nothing like the feeling of reaching down for your gun and it's not there because it fell out of your $5 holster. And so that's the only thing I ever say to people that are open carry is like, hey, be proficient and
That's the
invest
good
in this
stuff.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spend $100 on a good holster with a locking mechanism on it. I had a guy sent me a video the
That's
other
right.
day that, you know what I'm talking about. So
Mhm.
I had a guy sent me a video the other day from the internet where a kid had a gun literally sticking out of his back pocket, had a some kind of semi-automatic pistol, and he went up to pay for it, and three guys walked up behind him and grabbed the gun, and he walked outside
Are
going, "Hey
you
man, give me my gun
serious?
back." Yeah, they said, "Give me my gun back, give me my
In the
gun
gun
back."
store,
No, he
or
was in a
was it
convenience store,
convenience
and
store?
a very crowded convenience store, and he walked outside arguing with them, going, "Give me my gun back," and they shot him with his own gun. And, I think that there's a responsibility there, but the law says you can open carry and everyone has a right, unless your rights have been taken away because of your actions, everyone has a right to
So
to possess a firearm and to open carry. And so I just
what you're
want to be
saying is,
responsible.
what you're saying basically, if I'm not mistaken, is they have the right, but it would be awful nice if they get some training.
Yeah, because with the right
and
comes a
and, and no,
responsibility.
it's a big responsibility to be carrying, and of course it is being concealed too, but
Hmm.
uh like you say, open carry, a lot of guys won't do open carry. I know a lot of dates that I ain't doing no open carry, and then some people think, well, it might keep somebody from approaching me. Where if I'm concealing, they might approach me and then I have to use it. Whereas if they see it, maybe they'll go somewhere else. That there's truth to that, but then again, there's not truth to that. So
I personally myself, I've got a small M&P shield that I carry off duty. And I like it because it's a 9 millimeter pistol. It's small enough that I don't. There are a lot of people, even in Arkansas, that are offended if they see you with a firearm.
oh yeah,
I always have my badge. It's part of our department policy is if you're going to carry, even if the gun's hidden, you have to put your badge right next to it so that if
right,
you lifted your arm up and your shirt came up, someone saw the gun, they would
yeah.
also see the badge. And because there are some people that are concerned about that. I would prefer that the criminals think that we're all on, and that they go somewhere else. But I believe that with all of our constitutional rights, like they taught us in the academy at FLETC and recruit school, the highway police, you have a constitutional right the first to freedom of speech, but you can't go into a crowded theater and yell fire. There's a responsibility. Just like the same thing with the Second Amendment, you have the right to carry and to open carry. But if something stupid happens and you do something dumb because you didn't train or you didn't prepare or you were negligent in retention or locking your gun up or whatever, there could be consequences for that. And that's all I ask of people is that if you're going to exercise your rights, that make sure that you are fluent in the rights and responsibilities.
You probably remember this. Kevin's too young to remember this. He may know it. You remember a sheriff in Pulaski County by the name of Tommy Robinson?
I do remember Tommy Robinson.
The name sounds familiar. I don't know.
He was a badass.
He was probably before your time, to be honest.
He was.
I was very young when he was
Yeah.
sheriff.
Well, I don't know if you remember when they were having a lot of armed robberies in liquor stores, convenience stores, and in Little Rock, Little Rock, and I think a couple of people got killed, and a couple of clerks. And Tommy decided, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it at various locations. I'm not going to tell you where, different places. I'm going to put a deputy with a shotgun behind a two-way glass.
Mm-hmm. He had a mirrored box.
And I'm not going to tell you where. Well,
yeah.
Apparently, somebody tried it, and they went to one of those, and
there was a deputy in
blew him away. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, after that happened, crime went boom.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked to an old deputy.
They quit robbing those places.
I talked to a deputy that a lot of people say, well, he had put these reflectors, it looked kind of like a phone booth, and they said, and the Sheriff Robinson actually got on the news at the time, and I remember seeing the commercials.
He loved getting on the news.
Yeah, and he said there might be someone in there might not. He goes, right. You take that chance. And I had a lot of people that told me at the time, oh, they're not putting anybody in there or whatever. Yeah. And I talked to a couple of deputies after I became a police officer that had been around for years and years, and they said, no, I spent many a night in that working security at liquor stores.
It was shoot to kill too.
Yeah, it absolutely was. They were in there with a 12-gauge shotgun. And they said that when they installed those boxes that the deputies would set in the liquor stores, said that overnight that the liquor store robberies immediately came to a stop. And the reason was that criminals need to know that their punishment for crime is going to be swift, it's going to be severe, and it's going to be relative to what they did. And so
they want a soft target. They want a soft target.
And so and that's the problem we have with our criminal justice system right now is that it takes so long to get someone arrested and to get them into court and to get them tried through the judicial system. And then unfortunately in Arkansas, most people, unless it's a violent felony, they're going to get probation initially. And then when they, and they'll plea it down because that's usually what happens with most of our crime is that it's pled down from this charge to this charge. And criminals aren't afraid of going to prison because they're only going to spend a certain amount of their time because of bed space. And they're not afraid of swift and severe punishment. But back in the time, and I don't necessarily want to take it back to the Tommy Robinson days because there were some things that Tommy did that wouldn't fly now, but he was addressing some serious issues, and he really didn't have any other resources available.
He was
Um,
Buford Pusser.
yes, he was. And I met him much later in life. He retired to Eastern Arkansas and became a farmer. And I met him
Brinkley.
much later in life, and and talked to him, and he was very old then. But
He
he
rough
still,
around the edges.
yeah, but he still loved being a police officer. And what's funny was that he had opened up a liquor store later in life, and he said never got robbed. And I said, I don't imagine that you did. So
He didn't take no crap up in Congress either when he was there. That didn't last long either. He just an outspoken guy, and he never saw a camera he didn't like, and he just was an outspoken guy, and he's probably rolling over his grave to see some of the things right now because he's nothing passed away now. But he was a quite a character. He's quite a
well,
character.
I think there's a way to be tough on crime and to address the issues that we've got without embarrassing Saline County in general. And, I want to be, like we say in the military, you want to be quiet professionals. And so, if a press conference needs to happen or if the public needs to be informed about a crime or a situation that's developed, then I'm all for, using my experience on the radio or whatever to go forth and go, hey, here's what we've got. We need the public's health or help with this. Or, here's what's going on right now. Here's what we know, and we'll let you know when we get further. But I don't necessarily think that I don't want Saline County to become this sideshow to make it sound like, because what happens is the next thing you know, people start thinking that we're overrun with crime. And I want to address the crime, put the bad guys in jail, and do it in a professional manner.
I want to mention one thing. We were talking about the uh, not constitutional carry, but stand your ground. You remember
Yes.
Trayvon Martin situation in Florida at that time when the crime neighborhood crime guy shot him and all that. You remember him?
I remember,
The
I
black
remember
kid
vaguely some
down
of
it,
the
and he
stuff
was
I saw on the
Hispanic guy.
news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I know that he could have. That's one. I used to use this situation when I was teaching CHCL. I said that's a situation where uh, they had stand your ground down there. So if you had not had that, this uh, the way he killed Trayvon Martin,
Mm.
and he could have avoided the kid. Though. Kid was 17, but he instead of calling the police, he called the police, but then he's jacking around with this kid. When the kid
Yeah.
jumps on him,
Yeah.
Pete starts getting the better of him, beating the hell out of him, and he shoots him and kills him. But he could have stayed away. It was not his job to go pursue this guy when he didn't know, when he couldn't handle it, you know. So he caused a death that was probably unnecessary. If he'd waited on the police to get there, the kid probably would have never died. He'd just been arrested. If arrested, I think he was. They made him out as being a real innocent kid, and I don't think he was. But at the time, I don't think he was doing anything but just hanging around. But anyway, that's just a good example of people not being responsible with their actions, trying to do something that they don't know what they're doing.
Well, and I think that, no law enforcement officer leaves the house and says, I hope I get into a shooting tonight. Nobody goes to work
No.
and says, I hope I ever have to take a life. I don't want my law enforcement officers to be injured or killed, but we don't want to hurt a suspect either. Unfortunately, some suspects don't leave you a choice. Some people just are violent, and there are predators in society, and that's what we do is we go down and protect society from those people. But in a situation like that, and just what I know from the news, generally speaking, if there's a way to avoid the conflict and still do your job, then we should try and explore that avenue. I think that this guy had a gun and was looking for a problem, and he found one, and and then it became this national
Oh
conversation
yeah, yeah.
about different things, and so I would just ask that if anyone's going to exercise their constitutional right to carry a firearm and protect themselves. If you have to protect yourself, then absolutely protect yourself. But make sure that you've got the training and know what the law is before, not after the situation.
Mm-hmm. But I think we got to. I still feel like we have a pretty good county, and I don't think
Oh, we've got a great county. Yeah.
And I just have seen, but it's not just here. There's been a surge of crime all over the country, and we're just part of that deal, where you've seen a little bit, you see there's just been more, to be honest, killings and stuff that you just didn't hear about before. And like you said, they need to have the message at least that, hey, you're not going to get away with that here.
Well, right now, if you're on probation in Arkansas, even if it's for, like I said, anything other than a violent crime, like right now, an example is that we arrested a guy for an actual violent crime for terroristic threatening and aggravated assault. When we arrested him, he had 8 grams of methamphetamine and a quarter pound of weed on him. He spent 7 months in the county jail waiting to go to trial. When he finally took a plea agreement, and they suspended, they do this suspended imposition of sentence where he got 52 years suspended imposition of sentence. And basically that means that if you get arrested again and charged with another felony or another crime, then we'll revoke your probation and you'll go to the penitentiary and you'll do 52 years. In return for suspending this sentence, we're going to put you on, I think they gave him 5 or 6 years probation, and they said we're going to do drug testing, all this other stuff. Well, of course, I know it'd be shocking to you, but we arrested him again the other day. He's been on probation for about 7 months, and he's out the next day. And I called his probation officer and I said, well, how does this work? This is state probation. And they said, well, we only drug test twice a year, and he knows when it is. It's June 1st and January 1st. I said, well, you know,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, so he doesn't really have to study for his drug test.
Oh, surprises. They don't
Yeah.
give them surprise. They do that in the military, give you surprise drug test.
Yeah, and so we'd arrested him for some felony drug charges again, and he was given a bond, and they're working their way through the hearing, and they said, well, we may violate him and send him down to the Omega unit for a couple of months.
He knows how to
And
work the system.
that's exactly it, and that's the problem we have now is I think the reason we're having violent crime is because when these criminals commit nonviolent crimes, nothing happens. They spend some money, they go to probation. It's almost a christening for some of these guys to go to the county and spend some time and to get their first felony or put their charge on. I've heard, some groups, brag about going down for their first stint or whatever. And they're not scared of it. They're not worried about going to Tucker or to, Cummins or someplace like that. And so when they get out, it hasn't really been addressed and they haven't really been, punished or negatively impacted by it. And so they go out and they commit another crime. And I think what happens is it accelerates to the point that when they finally, and I've seen it so many times, you take a young person who has been in the system and has committed so many different felonies, and then by the time they commit a violent crime and they kill somebody and they go to the prison, they go to the pen, and the judge goes, you're going to go do 40 years, and the minimum of this is you're going to do a little over 30. And they start bawling because they're doing the math that they're 20 years old and they're doing, and we just had a guy that was sentenced for a homicide in England in 2023 before I got there. And he started bawling and crying because now he was getting locked up, locked up. He wasn't going to do 6 months or 8 months or whatever. He was going to do decades. And now he regrets his actions. And the responsibility's on him because he
Sure.
committed the crime. But I think that as society as a whole, if we had been able to have a place to lock him up, to hold him accountable, to not release him because the jails are full, to if he got violated for his first probation, send him down and put him in the penitentiary for a year or two and take away his freedom and make it unbearable while he's there, maybe we wouldn't be dealing with his homicide later.
Yeah, and I think this is my personal opinion. These kids that are committing murders and stuff, 14, 15, 16, I kind of have a lot of people are soft on that. And say, well, they're kids. I don't give they know what they're doing. Okay. And until they come down on these kids, maybe the parents in some situations, but some situations it's the kid. But until they come down on that, they're going to keep thinking they can get away with it. Oh, my record will be clean when I'm 18. The hell with that, I mean, I
Well,
know that's not a sheriff's deal. That's more you get into, a higher
well,
level, but
but, but it
it's
can be a sheriff deal because,
sure,
like,
sure.
I don't know if you saw it on Facebook or not, but my wife and I are very big on the community as a whole. When we got married, she was teaching in one of the Saline County school systems, and I got to know her students. And you interact with them. Of course, these students most of the time I know their parents or their family or whatever because
Hmm.
they've been here forever. And I started noticing things that we have here in Saline County that a lot of places don't. And we've got our Bryant Youth Association and our Saline County Boys and Girls Club. And when I decided to run for sheriff, I was looking at the things that we're doing well and going, okay, we need to increase that and maintain that. Um, and one of the things is like the Bryant Youth, they have after school programs
Hmm.
that provide structure and food and education and something for them to do other than roam the streets.
Hmm.
And the Saline County Boys and Girls Club, they do the same thing. And so we've made some donations of playground equipment, say playground equipment like toys,
Yeah.
educational tools, different things like that to both groups because they deserve our support. And education is usually cheaper and in the long run, a lot better for society than incarceration is. And that's where, as a sheriff, you got to look at like when I went last Thursday and donated all this stuff to the Boys and Girls Club in Saline County in Benton there on Airport Drive. Um, I didn't tell them I was running for sheriff. Those kids don't care. It was
Right.
full, these kids were ninth, from kindergarten to 9 years old. And, but the thing is, they knew my name and why I was there. And that, I was just happy to see kids being kids. And if you spend some time with them, invest with them now and invest in the community now, then I can deal with them in a positive manner when they're 18, 19, 20 years old, as
Hmm.
opposed to kind of what I'm dealing with in my town. We have no after school activities. The parents are usually working and are busy. They're either in Little Rock or North Little Rock or Stuttgart working. They're not going to be home until hours after the kids are out of school. And so you've got this large group of people that are unsupervised with access to drugs and firearms, and that's never a good thing. And so I want to make sure that we have a good working relationship with the Bryant Youth Association and the Saline County Boys and Girls Club because that's the way we reduce crime for the next generation.
Yeah, because we're fighting enough. With the internet and the games and the
Hmm.
and all the TikTok and all that crap. These kids, a lot of them are not getting parented. I mean, I'm just going to
Exactly.
say it. They're not getting
Exactly.
parented correctly. And, there's a lot of kids that are just really people have dropped the ball with. And it gets to a point where it's too late. It does get to a point at an age where it's kind of, they're going to be a criminal. I mean,
Well,
it's just going to happen.
and
But
Keith, here's an example. Back in July, one of my officers called me Saturday afternoon. The sun's out, it's hot. People are around walking the streets, riding their bicycle. He says, "Hey, Chief, went to make a traffic stop on this car. I run the tag's stolen. As soon as I turn the blue lights on, kid takes off running." I go over there and, drive out to it and got some other people there by the time I get there. And the person fled and he was wearing a mask when he fled. And, basically we had a really vague description because he was wearing a hoodie and long pants on it. In fact, the only thing was that he had run out of his slides. We recovered the car and had been stolen 4 hours earlier at a softball field at a softball tournament in Sweet Home. And so we called the owner, got the car back to the owner, brand new car. They had punched the steering column. The insurance had to pay for the repairs and different things like that. We had the first name of the kid. Little Rock Police Department calls us 2 weeks later and says, "Hey, is this kid a suspect in your theft?" And they send me a picture. He's wearing the same hoodie and the first name. I said, "Yes, he fled from a traffic stop on a stolen car." And he goes, "Well, unfortunately, he was shot and killed over here off of Roosevelt. He was stealing another car, and the car was already stolen, and it had two drug dealers in it who were about to rob another drug dealer. And when he ran up to the car with a gun, everybody started shooting." And and the thing is, what's bad is that two bystanders who weren't doing anything but grilling on their front porch got shot in the process. And that's where you've got to look at one unsupervised kid. and somebody taught him how to steal a car, and then he stole a car and found a gun, and then he started driving around looking for other cars and guns and things to support his drug habit and different things like that. Then the next thing you know, he's in a gang, and then they're driving around and they're going to shoot up the other gang, and it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And look at what it cost Little Rock to work that homicide. Look what it cost us to come out and work the
Yeah.
stolen car and the fleeing. When if we had, and maybe the kid would have never embraced an after school program or whatever, but if it's worth a shot. And morally, it's the right thing to do is to try and get these kids before you lose them at 15, 16 years old after they've already committed 4 or 5 felonies. At that point, it's very hard to change their behavior. But if we help them like the BYA does and the Boys and Girls Club, they start at preschool, kindergarten, all the way up to, I think high school age. And give them something to do, give them some skills, give them some. And the thing is, they get social skills where they network among their peers and they do some, the peer review type stuff where this is acceptable behavior, this isn't. And I've seen a lot of good come out of things like that. And so I want to build that relationship when I'm sheriff and make sure, because like I said, that's the way you keep the next generation from becoming a statistic.
We're about out of time, but I didn't want everybody
Yeah.
to know in the audience that when I grew up, there's been problems with kids that's not a new thing. I mean, I knew a lot. I grew up in North Little Rock. There was a lot of bad dudes. I knew some of them died, some of them went to prison. I mean, there were some bad dudes running around, but it wasn't as many. I mean, it wasn't as common.
Right.
But hey, Kevan, you want to throw up his on his website? Have you
Yeah, I'm
got
about
that?
to do that right now.
Okay, we're going to show your website and your page. Your do what?
The Facebook page, if you can.
Yeah, Facebook and website.
Feel free to
And
send me
you
messages.
got on there where you can donate and all that to your campaign, because I know anybody running for office needs a little cash to run on. There's no doubt about that.
Correct. There it is. And the election, Keith, is March 3rd.
Right.
That's it. There's my lovely wife. And the election's March 3rd. Early voting starts second week of February. And so I know that for the last 100 years or so, it's been in May, but they've moved up the primary now. And so that's why you're seeing signs out and you're seeing people out asking for donations and campaigning right now, is because they've moved our schedule up for 2 months. And so, but feel free to reach out to me, send me any questions you like and comments, and I would be glad to answer any questions you might have, because I believe that an elected official works for the people and you're responsible to the people, and that you should respond to their questions, respond for their request for assistance, and remember who you work for.
Well, we're glad you came on.
Thank you.
And everybody, check out Richard's website and his, and read about him. He's got a lot of information on there about himself. And keep him in mind when it comes up time in March.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
And we appreciate you coming on, and I hope you got to say what you wanted to say. We covered a lot about law enforcement. That's what you're going to be doing, right? That's your primary job, to be the chief law enforcement officer of Saline County.
Yes, sir.
So, you got anything else, Kevan?
Yeah, guys, don't forget to go look us up on Arkansas First tomorrow when we get the video set up. We're on YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook. And other than that, I ain't got nothing else.
And you can bring this show back up to watch. This is live. It will be recorded to where you can go back and watch it anytime. And let me put a plug for I'm the chairman of the flag. We're creating a new flag for Saline County. Not a new flag, a flag. We don't have a flag.
Yeah.
And I get a little grief about, why do you mean we need a flag? Well, people have flags. They like flags.
It supports our community, and it brings us all together.
We're one of the fastest growing communities in the state. And but anyway, we had it to the high school students last month for a month. We didn't get as many as we wanted, so we put it out to the public till November 7th, 4:30. So you can go to salinecounty.org, go to the flag contest and make you up a flag and enter it. So that's my plug for that.
I like that.
So Richard, you can make you a flag too.
I might try that. You know, a banner. We always had a banner in the military. You marched behind your banner and you followed your banner. So
but it's got all the rules on the application you fill out, and then you can make your flag and you can turn it in either online or to the judge's office. So anyway, I'm plugging that because I got to plug it tomorrow night at Forum Court too. So to let everybody know, because we told everybody it was gonna be done, but we decided to extend it to the public to maybe get a little bit more better selection because there's no rush in it. So again, Richard, thanks, and we try to have you back. It's going to be a long election. We're just getting started with this election stuff, so we got a long ways to go to March. Be a lot of politicking in March. So between January and March,
I'll be glad to come back anytime.
And we appreciate you. And Saline County is out.
Y'all have a good one, guys.